The SNOWBANK mystery, the John O'Keefe trial, what the key evidence revealed. On a freezing January morning in Canton, Massachusetts, a 46-year-old Boston police officer lay unresponsive in the snow. Just hours earlier, he had been at a gathering with friends. By sunrise, flashing lights cut through the storm. Within days, his girlfriend would be charged.
2 juries, over 3 years.
Dozens of witnesses and forensic specialists.
Digital analysts and crash reconstruction experts.
They would see fragments of broken plastic. They would examine cell phone data. They would hear conflicting expert testimony. And ultimately, 12 citizens would face one question. What did the key evidence actually prove? This is the story of John O'Keefe and the trial of Karen Reed. A case that began in a snowbank and ended in a courtroom divided by doubt. John O'Keefe had served 16 years with the Boston Police Department. Colleagues described him as steady, said something else defined him, responsible. After the sudden deaths of his sister and brother-in-law, he became guardian to their 2 children. School drop-offs, homework routines, family dinners, structure during chaos. By 2022, he was in a relationship with Karen Reed, a finance professional with a background in academia.
Friends testified their relationship had its tensions. Voicemails later played in court revealed frustration, but no documented history of violence.
On January 28, 2022, they met friends at the Waterfall Bar and Grill. The forecast called for snow. By midnight, the storm had begun, and the night was still unfolding.
The night in question.
After midnight, several members of the group went to a residence on Fairview Road. Karen Reed drove O'Keefe's SUV. Snowfall intensified. Road conditions worsened. According to prosecutors, O'Keefe exited the vehicle upon arrival. They argued that while maneuvering the SUV, Reed reversed and struck O'Keefe. The prosecution presented evidence suggesting damage to the vehicle's rear taillight was consistent with impact. They alleged she then left the scene. The defense disputed this interpretation. In the early morning hours, O'Keefe was discovered in the snow outside the residence. Emergency responders testified that Reed appeared distressed and made repeated statements expressing concern about what had occurred. Medical testimony later concluded that the cause of O'Keefe's death was blunt force trauma to the head and hypothermia due to prolonged exposure to cold. The dispute was not whether he died, it was how, and whether the physical evidence aligned with the prosecution's theory. Early investigation. Investigators recovered fragments of red plastic from the snow. The prosecution argued those fragments matched the broken taillight of Reed's vehicle. Forensic analysts testified that microscopic debris consistent with the taillight material was found on O'Keefe's clothing. Vehicle data was introduced, showing reversing movement during the relevant time frame. Toxicology evidence suggested alcohol consumption earlier that evening. Prosecutors presented the case as strongly supported by physical evidence. The defense prepared to challenge that interpretation. The defense challenges the reliability of the evidence, highlighting inconsistencies in witness testimony and procedural errors. Defense attorneys focused on investigative procedure and forensic interpretation. They questioned whether all potential evidence had been properly preserved. They examined timelines. They raised concerns about digital search data introduced at trial. One disputed point involved an internet search made by an individual associated with the residence. The defense argued that forensic analysis suggested the timing of that search raised questions. Prosecutors maintained that the search occurred later and did not indicate prior knowledge. The jury ultimately had to evaluate competing expert testimony. Another issue involved text messages sent by a lead investigator about the defendant. During testimony, those messages were acknowledged as inappropriate. The defense argued that such conduct raised concerns about investigative impartiality. Prosecutors responded that the comments did not affect the collection or analysis of evidence. The courtroom became a forum for assessing credibility, not only of the defendant, but of investigators and experts. First trial outcome. In April 2024, the first several weeks, jurors heard testimony from law enforcement, medical examiners, digital analysts, crash reconstruction experts. The prosecution argued the evidence supported a collision involving impairment. The defense argued the physical injuries were inconsistent with that scenario. After extended deliberations, the jury reported that they were unable to reach unanimous agreement. A mistrial was declared. The case would proceed to retrial. Second trial. Expert witnesses revisited black Lexus SUV damage analysis from both front and back side of the vehicle. Medical testimony was scrutinized again. Both sides emphasized inconsistencies in the opposing interpretation. For the jury, the task was specific. Did the evidence prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt? After 4 days of deliberation, they returned to court. The verdict. The jury delivered its decision. Not guilty of second-degree murder. Not guilty of manslaughter while operating under the influence. Not guilty of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. Guilty of operating under the influence of alcohol. The most serious charges were rejected. The court imposed probation how lay that jury interpreted the key evidence presented. Aftermath and open questions. The legal case concluded, but public discussion continued. Civil matters followed. Professional reviews within agencies occurred. For some observers, the verdict reinforced the principle that criminal convictions require proof beyond reasonable doubt. For others, questions about the events of that night remain unresolved. What this case ultimately demonstrates is how evidence can be interpreted differently inside a courtroom. In the end, a jury does not decide what might have happened. They decide what was proven. And sometimes, even after 2 trials, the most enduring element of a case is not certainty, but debate.